Despite being a democracy, if there's one thing that Americans can't get enough of, it's royalty. From children being obsessed with their favorite Disney princess to the estimated 29 million American viewers of Harry and Meghan's wedding, the illustrious presentation of the British monarchy is something that has deeply embedded itself into our hearts. And no person has done that more so than Princess Diana of Wales. So today, I will be covering the legacy, history, and conspiracy of Princess Diana's death. So, let's get started into who was Princess Diana. Diana Spencer was born in September of 1961 to Edward and Frances Spencer, the former holding the title of Viscount Althorp and eventually inheriting the title of Earl. As a child, her family rented an estate owned by Queen Elizabeth II, Prince Charles's mother. You might think that this was where she first made significant contact with him, but the staggering 13-year age gap made it much more likely that Diana would have had contact and played with Prince Andrew or Edward, Charles's younger siblings. Now, Diana didn't come into close contact with Charles until she moved to London in 1978, where she worked as a kindergarten teacher. It was during this time in London that Charles began to court Diana, and they eventually got married at St. Paul's Cathedral in 1981. Diana had recently turned 20 and Charles was 32. During their marriage, Diana gave birth to two children, Prince William and Prince Harry. However, despite this, her marriage to Charles was very much tumultuous and it was not healthy at all, and it ultimately ended in divorce in 1996. Now, let's answer the question, what happened to Diana on August 31st? On August 31st, 1997, Diana and her romantic partner at the time, Dodi Al-Fayed, left the Ritz Hotel in Paris after being hounded by paparazzi. The pair left at 11:30 through the back entrance with driver Henry Paul and bodyguard Trevor Rees-Jones. Driving a Mercedes S280 limousine, the car sped through central Paris until crashing into the 13th pillar of the Pont d'Alma bridge at 12:19 a.m. Al-Fayed and Paul died at the scene, and Diana later died in Paris's La Pitié-Salpêtrière hospital at 4 a.m. at the age of 36. This left Rees-Jones as the sole survivor of the crash. The incident was initially blamed on Paul, who was supposedly speeding, and a later 2008 inquest by the British police found that Paul's blood showed 3 times the legal limit in France for drunk driving. The inquest jury ruled that both Paul and the paparazzi were responsible for the crash due to gross negligence, though nobody was charged for what was considered to be unlawful killings, which was basically the equivalent of manslaughter. The reason why nobody was charged was because at this point Paul was dead. The reason why the paparazzi were not charged was due to an earlier 1999 French investigation showing that there was enough distance away from the paparazzi and the Mercedes for there to be any implication for the crime. According to the 2008 inquest as well, there was special mention that the lack of seatbelts was also a key factor in the death of these individuals. Now, some people just left it at that. However, 2 main figureheads opposed this during the time leading up to the Inquisition and subsequently after. This was the British newspaper, the Daily Express, as well as Dodi's father, Mohammed Al-Fayed. They alleged that these murders were potentially orchestrated or planned. So, what is the main claim for the conspiracy theory of Diana's death? The main claim was that foul play was detected in the death of Princess Diana, most likely due to the government. Now, this included a multitude of underlying claims that helps further the concept of foul play. Some examples are the fact that while the driver was drunk, he had a supposedly sober demeanor. A former M16 officer claimed that they had been involved in the crash. Diana was supposedly secretly pregnant with Dodi's child. The fact that there was also no recorded footage of the fatal collision itself, along with many, many more claims made. Now let's break this down into 3 prominent pieces of media surrounding the conspiracy. The first is Paul Burrell and his letter. Paul was Diana's butler and worked as a servant of the British royal household, and he appeared at the aforementioned 2008 British inquest. So he was questioned on a letter that he supposedly had received from Diana in 1993. In the letter, Diana alleges that her husband, Prince Charles, is planning an accident in order for him to be able to marry again. She also says that she had been battered, bruised, and abused mentally by a system for 15 years now. While the letter itself may be compelling, Paul himself was not a compelling witness. He admitted to the magazine The Sun that he did not tell the whole truth at the inquest and had also thrown in some red herrings, all suggesting potential perjury. While he was not considered a compelling witness, this letter is compelling and there has been no evidence to suggest that Diana did not write it. So that is just something to keep in mind as well. Now, when it comes to what type of sensory info this is, it is visual because you are reading it. The degree of definition is real to a certain extent. Now, this is because if you were to receive the letter and read it in your own hands, it would feel a lot more real rather than just reading it online as most people did. So for most people, the degree of definition was relatively low. The direction of information was one way because while people read this, there was no way for them to comment on it to anyone else. Now, this also leads the nature of bidirectionality to be unidirectional communication. People can only read and respond to it within whoever they are talking to at the time. Now, the level of difficulty to decode is pretty low. It's pretty easy to read it and to understand what Princess Diana is saying within the letter. For the physical requirements and engaging in the media, you would have to have access to the paper and or court coverage, and you would also have to be literate enough to read the letter. The scope of dissemination is only 1 to 2 people at a time, just because it is something that you would read as opposed to watching it. The second media we'll be looking at is the newspaper, the Daily Express. Now, the Daily Express was a British tabloid that became well known for publishing front-page stories on Diana and the suspected foul play in her death, and the articles regularly quoted Al-Fayed. And now, when I say that they were known for reporting on Princess Diana, they had a series of frontline stories that they would have, and even when surrounding historical events would happen, they would still find some way to have Diana's conspiracy as the front page on their news source, so much so that they became renowned for having this, and they would have nicknames associated with their newspaper. Now, when it comes to the type of sensory info, this is also visual because you are reading it. The degree of definition is low because it is a newspaper and you are only reading it. The direction of information, much like the letter, is one way, although if you really wanted to, you could open this up to two-way direction of information because you could contact the Daily Express, whether it be through emailing them or a letter to the editor. There is a way to open that up. Now, the nature of bidirectionality, if you do not contact them, is unidirectional communication because there is no real conversation happening. However, if you were to contact the newspaper and open up communication that way, it would turn into turn-taking because you would be waiting for them to respond to you and vice versa. Now, the level of difficulty to decode is relatively low. This is because the Daily Express was a tabloid newspaper, and usually for tabloid magazines and newspapers, you want to make sure that it is really easy to decode for the average person in order to get the most views or clicks on your article. So for this reason, the level of difficulty is fairly low. Now, the physical requirements for engaging this medium is having access to the paper itself as well as being literate enough to read it. And the scope of dissemination, once again, is 1 to 2 because you are reading it. The last media that we'll be looking at is what is called Operation Paget. Now, this was from the British Metropolitan Police Force. It was their inquiry established in 2004, which began being published in 2006. It was created to investigate the theories surrounding Princess Diana's death, including 175 conspiracy claims made by Al-Fayed. It brought in to cover every associated allegation made through the media, in legal submissions, and informal correspondence since the crash. Although it had been drafted as an internal police document, because of the public interest in Diana and it being so strong, it was eventually published to the internet, making it available for public consumption. There are 16 chapters of the report, and at the end of each chapter, it concluded that all allegations made since the crash of conspiracy were without foundation, and that all the evidence obtained points to the deaths of Diana and Fayed as being the result of a tragic accident. So, unlike the letter and the newspaper that we looked at, this exercises no conspiracy theories and actually moves to go against them. So that is what makes this different than the other media that we have looked at. For the type of sensory info, it is also visual because you are reading it. The degree of definition is low for this reason as well. The direction of information is one way because there's no way for you to contact them further from this. It was made solely for the consumption of the public without any contact after that. For this reason, the nature of bidirectionality is also unidirectional. But unlike the other two media sources, the level of difficulty to decode is hard. This is because there are 16 chapters and it takes time and effort to go through them all. Like I mentioned before, this police report was originally just an internal document for the police force, so it was not intended for public consumption. The only reason why they opened it up was because people wanted them to, so it's not expected for everyone to be able to understand it, and thus it is hard to decode for the average person. When it comes to the physical requirements for engaging in this medium, it is you would have to have internet access and computer access to be able to read these police reports, as well as, like the others, being literate enough to read. And the scope of dissemination, much like the others, is 1 to 2, depending on who you are reading it with, whether it be with yourself or with one other person. Tabloid and media coverage of the conspiracy theories were at its height between the date of the crash and the date of the 2008 inquest, but major media coverage of the conspiracies died around 2008 when the inquest eventually shut down all conspiracy theories and basically said that there was no substantial evidence to exercise them further. But even so, the conspiracy theories have only gained traction within alternative media channels. So even though major media died down on the coverage in 2008, these ideas have continued circulating over time even more so. And this is not entirely by the British tabloids. Instead, through social media and television media, alternative media sources have kept this conspiracy theory prevalent. And this is majorly due to the main themes that are surrounding this conspiracy theory and with Diana in general. And these are mostly positive associations. The people loved Princess Diana. There was a reason that she was called the People's Princess. When she died, it was an estimated 1 million people that came to her funeral. And on the other hand, people did not like Charles, especially with his affair with Camilla. People just did not like him, and because of that, they did not like the establishment of the British monarchy. Public perception of Diana was the main reason that this conspiracy theory holds out in the long run. She was considered to be this nice, great person. She was involved in charities, and overall, people really loved her. And when good or nice people die in tragic events, people often want justice or retribution. So that is a dominant theme in this conspiracy theory, the idea of justice and retribution for Diana. They often say that people like her, these kind of people that die in tragic accidents, they deserved better. That was a common thing that they would say, that Diana deserved better. Finding a person or a thing to blame could be a way for the public to solve their own problems, especially if the person to blame is an institution that has a pattern of being harmful to this individual. In Diana's case, this would be Prince Charles, and by association, the British monarchy at large. Princess Diana's impact over time, you can only see how much it has grown even to today just with the growth of the internet. And an example of the impact that Princess Diana has to this day, if you Google Princess Diana death, the first people also ask search in Google is, what did the Queen do to Diana? Which furthers the conspiracy theory that the British monarchy had something to do with her death, which is pretty telling to the impact. Alternative media sources such as documentaries, online videos, and TV shows only increase the traction of this conspiracy as well. Most recently, the TV show The Crown has just gotten to the Princess Diana timeline, which has brought a resurgence into the conspiracy once again, but on social media platforms such as Twitter. Twitter went absolutely wild with people tweeting about how angry they were at Charles, how once again Princess Diana deserved better, all of these things surrounding that, very anti-British monarchy sentiments by people on Twitter, which only circulates this even more. Now, something that is interesting about social media is that it allows for something that was not seen in the previous media that we established that was happening at the height of this actual conspiracy theory as these court things were happening, and this was multi-directionality. So social media as a form of alternative media allows users to talk and collaborate with one another in quick time, which aids in keeping this conspiracy theory alive. People are able to talk and to spread it to their own followers and to keep it running in conversational topics. Now, social media is also where the concept of immersion really comes through. From the previous media sources, there was no interaction other than just reading what the tabloids were saying, maybe talking about it to some of your friends, but nothing beyond that. It really just stayed confined with yourself and your own social circles. But now that there's social media, users can co-create their own ideas and thoughts about what they think happened to Diana. Now there is a community that is established, that is in place to discuss these things. So you can think of things such as YouTube videos and their comment sections, or threads on Reddit and Twitter threads as well. Now, the interactivity of social networking sites, such as Twitter or several forums, that is considered user-to-user content that allows for relationships, creativity, and collaboration, while YouTube and other generated content sites are considered user-to-document and allows for browsing, watching, and minor interactions with each other. Now, both of these are critical in the spread of conspiracy theories and keeping Diana's conspiracy theory alive. It almost allows for people to come together and create a sort of internet detective team where they can figure out what really happened and spread it among their own followings and friends, and really to keep it in circulation. Now, with social media, there is also more spreadability than there was with print media. In this context, you can take one of the key opinion leaders, which would be Mohammed Al-Fayed, and you can see that his reach only becomes broader when it comes to this age of social media and alternative media. For instance, he still does media interviews spreading his belief that the deaths of his son and Princess Diana were indeed orchestrated. One of these is an interview that he did on the conspiracy theories. So in conclusion, while we might not know what happened to Diana, the conspiracy theory will likely stay around for longer, if not for the rise of social media and the ability for it to spread and to keep circulating, but really the opinions of Diana. As long as Diana is seen as this pinnacle of innocence and kindness and goodness, people will want to come to a conclusion. They will want to solve her murder in an attempt to achieve that retribution or justice.